Hi guys, this is Tabiasoy, and today we're going to go through the Xeno and Leonidas boss fight in Trails of Cold Steel 2. Specifically, we're going to go through how to get the AP+3 bonus from the fight, so you can get the maximum S grade at the end of Chapter 1, while also being able to analyze the three enemy types that show up in this battle, mainly Xeno, Leo, and the Judgement Javelin, in case you're going for the Face of the Enemy, I believe, trophy, where you pretty much get the information for all the enemy types that show up in the game. Now, this fight is one of the more challenging fights early in the game, but at the same time, it's also not that difficult, at least if your only goal is to finish the battle. However, there are two things that you want to keep in mind while doing this battle in case you're a completionist. One, of course, is the aforementioned AP+3 bonus. That one pretty much just requires you to finish the battle a little bit more quickly within a set amount of turns. But that one actually isn't that hard because in this fight you actually want to burn the boss pretty quick because the longer the battle goes, the harder it gets. The more challenging thing is actually getting to scan all three enemy types that show up in the battle. And the reason it's hard is because doing that, you pretty much end up basically wasting 3 turns. And while you're wasting those turns, it allows the bosses to ramp up and for the Judgement Javelins to charge up. And so, depending on your team makeup, it could make the battle harder because you pretty much give your enemies time to sort of attack you. And so I've done this battle multiple times using different configurations just to see what works and what doesn't. And of course, your mileage might vary, you might come up with a method that's even better. But this is basically what worked for me in the certain amount of tries that I basically tried to do this battle. So as far as team makeup, I ended up choosing the team of Reen, Fee, Machias, and Tobal. And there are reasons why I ended up with those 4. Like Reen, for example, has the Motivate skill, which is helpful because it sort of boosts everybody's strength. Fee, on the other hand, has a really good craft as far as sort of attacking enemies in a cluster without requiring her to move, which I'll explain later. In the case of Machias, I wanted to use his craft for speeding up everybody's movement or speed. As far as Tobal versus Elliot, like Elliot's great if you plan on doing sort of a longer battle because he can heal better, but at the same time, since we're trying to finish this battle as quickly as possible, I ended up going with Tobal, mainly because his super attack is ranked triple S, SSS, while everybody else is either SS plus or SS. And so I decided to use him because of that, and also his magic actually isn't that bad. His magic attack is almost as high as Elliot's in my playthrough. So now as far as just general tactics, there are a few things that you want to keep in mind. One is, at least in my case, I wanted the enemies to be grouped together as closely as possible, and I also wanted my team to be sort of grouped together closely as possible too. And in the case of the enemies, it makes sense because when they're closer together, it allows you to hit several targets with area of effect attacks, which is especially helpful against the Judgement Javelins when Xeno starts throwing like several of them in the field. Those you basically want to address because they can do a number on your team by making them confused or just do all sorts of nasty stuff or even heal the enemies. So, and in the case of your team, normally you don't want to cluster together because it makes you susceptible to area attacks as well. But in my case, the reason I like to group my team together was because it helps me hit them with the buffs I need as far as this fight is concerned, which is mainly Reen's Motivate and also Machias's Speed Up Burst craft. And then as far as formation goes, I use an inverted Y with Fee at the very front. And the reason I do that is because I want Fee to sort of be the target of the enemy's attacks. Now, Fee isn't exactly the best tank in this game, but the reason I put her up front is because you can equip her with the materia that raises her evasion. And by doing that, you could normally evade at least half of all the hits, sometimes even more, depending on how RNG is going. Of course, it could go less than half too, but for the most part, she does a really good job evading and countering after. And so by doing that, then you sort of minimize damage to your backline, so you don't have to heal. Not that healing is necessarily important, because you want to go through this really fast, but you just want to make sure you don't get hit with the first few licks in. Now, like I said, the tricky part is getting to scan the 3 enemy types, and so I tried doing it with just arts, and that didn't quite work because it took too much time, especially if you end up using Machias, because Machias, at least in my case, was slower than everybody else, like by a large margin. And so the longer the fight went, the more of a disadvantage that was, so you don't really want the fight to go longer. And so the best combination I found was using a skill like maybe Detect or Analyze with Reen, and then maybe 2 battle scopes, because at least the battle scopes go pretty quick, And depending on how the turns go, you can have anybody use the battle scopes. Because that's another thing I've learned in this fight. It always doesn't start the way it does. And by that I mean there were times when I had the battle start with Fee and Reen moving first, but I've also had this battle start with the two bosses moving first. And even Xeno throwing Judgement Javelins right off the bat as opposed to waiting a turn later. So there are some variables that you can't control. Although I have one even when the boss started first, but it's always good if you started first. And then the other variables is whether Fee and Reen avoid some of the attacks or not. Now as far as the variables you can control, that's pretty much what attacks you use and who ends up using battle scopes and stuff. At first I wanted to just get it out of the way, so I had Fee use the first battle scope as opposed to attacking, and that didn't work out well because for some reason it made her move a little bit closer up front, and that just sort of messed up my formation, and it also made the bosses sort of split up so I couldn't hit them with the same area attack moves most of the time. And so with Fee I ended up just having her use that sweep craft on both the bosses, and the good thing about it is you can attack both bosses but it keeps Fee on the same spot so she doesn't move, so it doesn't mess up your formation. This move is also great later on, by the way, when the Judgement Javelins are thrown out, because it can hit them, especially if the Javelins are close to the bosses. And then for Reen, usually he ends up moving second. I end up just using Analyze, because I gave her the materia for that, just to do the first analysis, so that's one Analyze right there. And then usually, when it's Machias's turn, I use Burst Drive to speed everybody up. Now Toval is a bit tricky because usually when his turn comes, in several cases the Judgement Javelins show up right after his move. So depending on whether the Judgement Javelins are out or not, I either use like a magic spell if they're not, because it does really good damage on the two bosses, and then later on I have him use the second battle scope. Otherwise if the Judgement Javelins show up before he moves, then I use Toval to use one of the scopes. As far as who uses the scope, it depends on how the turns go. Usually I'll have Machias or Toval do it, while she continues to do sweep. And then for Reen on the second turn, that's when I use Motivate, which lasts about 3 turns. Because by then you should be able to sort of burn through the boss before it runs out. So basically the general idea is to keep attacking the boss with like sweep, in the case of Fee, or in the case of Toval, a powerful spell like Frost Edge. The idea then is to do enough damage before the Judgement Javelins start their chain attacks. Yeah, so you pretty much get an idea of how close that is by looking at the countdown. And then you look at the turn order on the left. And when you see that the Judgement Javelins are about to do their thing, that's when you want to start your final combination of attacks. Now usually the person who ends up getting a turn before that happens is either Reen or Fee. At least in my case, because they were my fastest characters. And once you see that, that's when you'll want to switch to your overdrive attack. And oh, and by the way, this is one thing that you want to do before the battle. Make sure everybody's overdrive is ready to go and that their special attack gauges are all filled out. Because then you can have everybody do just a massive attack together. Anyway, once you trigger overdrive, so the first 2 sort of turns of that overdrive, you just want to do a normal attack followed by an assist attack. And so you do that 2 times. And then for the last turn, which is the 3rd turn within the overdrive, you want to do another normal attack, but then you finish that off with a burst attack with a square button. And this one has all your team members pretty much gang up on your targets. Then after that, you just start chaining S-break attacks with all your characters. So right as the overdrive ends, just trigger your first one and then chain it to the second S-break attack, and then the third, and if needed, the 4th one. And usually by the 3rd S-break attack, the target I've been hitting the most, in this case like usually Leo, will then pause and then make a comment about how you were stronger than they expected. So that's how you know you've reached the threshold where you reduce somebody's HP to 30% or so, which is what you need to get the AP+3 requirements. And usually by the 4th, Xeno does the same thing for me, which ends the fight too. Just be careful, because depending on the timing, one of them might be able to sneak like one final blow in. But yeah, after that, that's pretty much done. You've satisfied the requirements for the AP+3 bonus while you've also scanned the 3 enemies so you can fill your book. Anyway, that's pretty much it as far as this fight goes. I'm sure other people have other methods, and that's fine. Diversity is what makes the world go around, after all. As always, if you have any thoughts or questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments section. Once again, this is Tabiasobi, and thank you for watching.